Okay, welcome back to Gold's Garage. So take a close look at this, especially you Mopar guys. For a change, it's not a small block Chev. I know you're getting tired looking at small block Chevs. This is, we're going to call this a mystery 340 Mopar engine. And this engine belongs to Blakelee Kimball. Blakelee is 9 years old. She's owned this engine since she was 1. And the car it's going into is a 1970 Dodge Start Swinger. And it's got a 390 rear end and it's a 4-speed car. So mystery engine, this was a barn find deal. Mike has actually had his hands on this engine for quite a few years. It's been in heated storage. He has seen it run sometime in the past. So we know it's got integrity inside. We haven't got it apart, but that's what we're going to do today. Take it apart and have a look at what we got to deal with and get going and start on the rebuild. We will take this engine completely apart, do whatever it needs to have done. Before we do that, please like and subscribe, and thank you for supporting my channel. And just a quick mention, Brian Salter and I are kind of collaborating now on this cooling issue with small block Chevs, not just small block Chevs. We've got a whole bunch of ideas. That'll come up, we'll talk about that. I got my thermal camera, I'm going to show you that, my thermal imaging camera. But back to the engine. So Mike just got it here today for Blakelee. And this is a long-term project, of course. I guess he's got till she's at least 15 or 16 to get it done. But we're going to get the engine done. And today we're going to take it apart, assess what we need, and we're going to go from there. So I guess I get that in there. For those that are interested, you know, I guess I'm a Chevy guy or a GM guy. Most of my stuff has been, but in 1969, I almost became a Mopar guy. I had a 67 Camaro 327 4-speed car, and I drag raced it lots. And one day somebody came along at the Texaco garage and offered me a price I couldn't resist, and I sold it right sight on scene. He drove it away and I walked home. So at that time in 69 in Canada, the best deal for a hot rod new, I would like to have a new Z28, but I couldn't afford one. They were about $4,000. But I actually made a deposit in Toronto, which was 8 hours from where I lived at the time, on a 1969 Dodge Start Swinger, 391 4-speed car, exactly pretty much like the one that Blakelee owns, only it's 69. This is a 70. So that was all good, and so we went down there. A buddy of mine drove me down, and we got there, and they didn't have one with 4-speed or 391 gears. They just saw it once they had my deposit. I was going to take whatever they had. So we fought all afternoon about that, and they finally, after a lot of arguing, gave me my deposit back. And so we're lost. We don't have a car. We're 500 miles from home. You know, we made a wasted trip. We're driving around, and my buddy Martin Foster, we were driving back by a Chevrolet garage, and there was a 68 Z28 Camaro sitting in the back of the parking lot, and that's it right there. I bought that car in 69, and but if the Dodge dealer would have had one with a 391 gear with a 4-speed, I probably would still be a Mopar guy, but that's the way life goes sometime. So that's a little war story to get in there. So what we're going to do is take this engine apart for you and show you what we got inside. We don't know ourselves yet. Mike said this engine has run, but it's been quite a few years. It's been stored for a long time. So we're going to take it apart and have a look and see what it needs. And he's already got a bunch of parts for it, an intake manifold, the camshaft, etc. But it'll be a complete rebuild, and we'll be taking this to Daryl's dyno as well and dynoing it. And so it'll be ready for Blakelee when she's ready to rock and roll. So hang in there and we'll see what happens next. Okay, let's get this Mopar apart and see what it looks inside. So we got it kind of semi-apart already. Valve covers are already loosened off. So for those guys who aren't familiar with Mopars, you don't have adjustable rocker arms like a Chevrolet does. They have rocker shafts. And so what's the advantage and disadvantage? Obviously, a rocker shaft is very, very very, very stable. In fact, high-end small block Chevs use rocker shafts, right? To stabilize it because it connects all the rockers together. Is there a negative? Maybe it transfers some harmonics back into the engine. I don't know. But anyway, that's the way they're made, and they're also non-adjustable. So, although that can be changed, right? Let's get the rocker shafts off. So, remember when you tighten anything down, you start at the middle and work out. But when you untighten it, you do the opposite. You start on the outside and work in. So, we're going to do that today. And I guess I should take the intake manifold off before I do that. So let's do that. I think Mike suggested that, but I didn't listen. So intake manifold. Won't take long. Stay organized, so I'll get one of my little organizing trays here. Intake manifold, off it comes. So we know it's a flat topic camshaft engine. And so what's the difference with the small block? The small block is a little different in that the lifter bores in Mopars are definitely bigger than in Chevrolets, and so is the camshaft. So I'm not talking about this lift or anything, I'm just talking about the physical size of it. So we need to get rocker shaft off. Okay, we had to get the organizer out so we can keep everything together. So this is actually numbered 13572468. Now, is it critical to have your push rods back where they came from? Not really, but it's probably a nice thing to do. And so we got to come around here and do the other side. Bring your back on my back on you. Okay. Rocker shaft off. Probably get this out of the way now, I guess. Okay, so we're on the teardown. We're trying to determine some stuff. It's a mystery engine. It's going to come completely apart, get completely rebuilt anyway, but it's always nice to learn as much as you can about it when you take it apart and you kind of know what you're into. So we're going to try to measure the camshaft lift and show you what it is. And camshaft lift and duration typically goes kind of together, especially for a street engine. Once I know the lift, we can get a pretty good idea, and I'll tell you what my guess is for duration. So one of the things that's different about a Chev, first of all, what's the same? So the cylinders are organized. It's actually the same, 1357 on this side, 2468 on this side. And then the valves go, if you start at number 1, exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. So that's the same. But since Chevs have individual rocker arms and Mopars have rocker shafts, in the case of a Chevrolet and a lot of other engines, the oil gets to the rocker arms by a hole in the pushrod that comes up from the valve lifter. Well, they don't do that. And so in the case of a Mopar, there's a little hole right there and that oil is feeding oil pressure, which goes into the rocker shaft and feeds all the rockers. And so that's different, but it's making it difficult for me to check the lift, because normally I center my dial indicator in the little hole that's 80 thousandths thick typically, where the oil comes up in a small block Chev, and it doesn't have a hole. So we already did this a couple of times. It's been a little tricky. So if Mike wants to come in here, we'll see what it looks like. So one other thing to point out too, we pulled a couple of lifters out, and the lifter, which is kind of nice, the lifter diameter, in fact, I think sometimes guys building Chevrolets actually put Mopar lifters in them and bore out the lifter bores. The lifter bores just over, they're right around 900 thousandths. I guess the battery's going in my, right around 900 thousandths, and I think a Chev's 834 or something like that. The lifters look in great condition. So once again, mystery engine, we don't know who put this together or whatever, but once we get some kind of a reading on the cam lift, we'll get an idea of what we got. So we got the push rod set up, lined up with our dial indicator, and so we are off the base circle now. Am I zeroed? We're zeroed, so let's see what we got. So around we go. Hopefully, once again, it's a little trick here because I don't have that nice little hole in the push rod to align my dial indicator, but it should work anyways. So here we go. We're starting to move. We're off the base circle. So there's 1, 2, 3, 309. So if that's right, 309 lift, that is an exhaust valve. Sometimes exhaust valves are a little more than the intakes on stock cams. They have different lifts and duration. Why do they do that? One of the reasons for street engines, because street engines usually get connected to exhaust manifolds and mufflers and tailpipes and all that, so the exhaust is less efficient. So having a little more lift and duration on the exhaust kind of helps that. And so 309, so let's just take out the little calculator here, and 309, rocker ratio is also the same as a Chevrolet, 1.5, 463.5 to say 464. So typically that's as big a cam as a Z28, Scott, by the way. So the Z28 engine is 485 before lash and 455 with lash. So typically a camshaft that's 468 will probably be definitely somewhere between 220 and 230 degrees, probably around 225 degrees. That's pretty typical. But we can figure out more when we get more measurements. We're just trying to get an idea of what we got. Mike, Blakelee doesn't intend to reuse this cam. Mike already has another cam for her anyway, but we just kind of wanted to see what we got. So we got a successful measure on one. We'll check a few others off camera just to validate that. And we'll also check an intake for what it's worth. So we're continuing with the teardown and inspection of Blakelee's 340. And we already checked an exhaust valve. So we're going to check an intake valve, and we're going to try and think about what camshaft this is. So we got it set up here. I mentioned already a little tricky with a Dodge because the oil doesn't come up through the push rod hole. It comes up through that little hole right there. And that doesn't help me checking the camshaft, because I usually like to do is get my dial indicator right in the middle of the push rod hole, and that helps to keep everything lined up. But let's see if we can get it around and get a number that's meaningful on it. So let's go. So we've got the dial indicator zeroed. Coming up pretty soon, guys. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, about 310 there. So allowing for a little bit of variation in the measuring, maybe a little bit of wear on the lifter and on the lobe of the cam. So there's a purple cam that Chrysler makes, 474, sorry. And it's actually 238. So between Mike and I were guessing that's what this is. So it's a pretty aggressive camshaft, and it's too bad because this engine's been sitting around a long time. The lifters look, the lobes of the cam look fine, and the issue is, you know, the lifter's been sitting around a long time, you know, whether we could reuse this cam. That might be a thought anyway. But whoever built this thing, it looks like they're aftermarket retainers. There's a few other differences as well. So obviously somebody built this thing to be hot rodded, and we will take the heads apart and check the spring pressures as well. But I'm pretty sure those are not stock springs, they're not stock retainers. And we'll find out what it's got. So doesn't need crazy big springs. The other thing that's different, we're going to do a couple comparisons from a small block Chev, is the angle of the lifters and the lifter bore is not aligned with the push rod. The push rod comes up at a different angle, and that doesn't affect the cam at all, but it will put there's always a tangential load against the bottom of the lifter bore. Now, if it's lubricated, probably doesn't hurt anything, but obviously it's a very successful engine, but it's different, right? So something we're not used to. So we're also going to do a little, I got a small block Chev, and we're just kind of wondering, you know, Mike, how much is a small block Chev versus a small block 340 weigh? I haven't got the answer to that right now. It looks like the Dodge engine might be a little heavier, but if you look at it from the back or the front and the cross section, they're pretty darn close, that's for sure. We actually measured it. The Dodge looks a little wider, but when I measured it, it doesn't come out to be very much. So I got to get my war stories in. So in 1969, I was in college, and the college organized, I think we were second or third year, and we had a trip to Detroit, and we spent 2 days in Detroit, and we spent 1 day at the Ford Dearborn plant, the Rouge plant, which at that time Ford actually owned the steel mill as well. So we started iron ore being unloaded on the dock and watched them drive Mustangs off the other end. That was pretty cool. The next day we went to the GM Tech Center, and they weren't at the Renaissance Center then, they were in downtown Detroit. I think it was the Cadillac building or the Cadillac Center or something like that it was called. And they actually took us through their engineering department and their R&D department. And we went into the dining room, and this is Chevrolet now, okay, Chevrolet engineering, into the dining room, and they had 2 dynos at the time, and they had a 340 Mopar on one of them and a 351 Ford on the other one, which I guess we shouldn't be surprised. They told us we got to know what the competition's doing. And so they actually bought competitors' engines and obviously took them apart to see how they ticked, right? So to stay ahead. So that was pretty interesting at the time. So we're going to continue on, get the heads apart, get the heads off, and take a look and see what it looks like inside. And so Blakelee can know what she's got to deal with in her 340 Mopar. We're going to get some heads off, start at the outside, and work our way to the inside. So different than the Chevrolet. Chevrolet's got 17 head bolts, and they're 7/16. This is like a Pontiac. It's got 10 head bolts, and they're 1/2 inch. So less bolts. And the issue with head bolts is finding room for them, because you got a lot of stuff that has to go on in the head. You got to get the air in and out. You got to have water, oil to get through it. Push rods got to get through there. A lot of things have to happen. So it's always a problem. Cylinder head is the busiest part of an engine, and finding room for everything. Well, let's get this guy apart and see what it looks like. I think I can get in there. I got in there before, didn't I? There we go. Okay. Oh. 1 minute. There we go. got a cylinder head. Do you want to look at the head, Mike, over here? There's valves are, I'm not sure what size they are, but they got to be a 2-inch anyway. I'm not a Dodge guy, but they can't get much bigger because they're going to be banging into each other if they do, right? So this cylinder looks a little bit rusty looking, suspect, right? So, but that could just happened in storage. We'll get it apart and find out what it looks like inside. Let's get the other head off. Okay, so here's what we found so far. We're trying to get as much in camera as we can on Blakelee's 340. So we did check the deck height, and with my deck height bridge, this is how you check deck height. So we find 0, and we just measure it where we're on the piston and where we're not on the piston, and the difference is. And the other way that we can check that, because we came so close to it, is just put a straight edge across the top of the piston and measure, where the gap is. Looks like these pistons are pretty much 0 decked, which means the quench area of the piston's coming right up flush with the deck. In fact, when we put it from here, we actually get it a little bit above, and from here it's a little bit below. So let's call it 0 deck. So estimating the head gasket thickness we measured is 43 thou compressed. We estimate that the combustion chamber volume is 60 cc's with that deck height, bore and stroke taken into consideration. So the bore, compared to a small block Chev, it's a 340, not 350. So it's a little bit more bore and a little bit less stroke. It's actually closer to a 327, 331, I think, is the stroke. So it's actually got a nicer bore stroke. Am I saying that? Nicer bore stroke than a small block Chev. Bore stroke relationship, I should say. So based on all that, Mike just ran the numbers, and we estimate we're somewhere between 9.5 and 10 to 1 compression ratio. We're estimating the dome volume of the piston. We don't have a part number on the piston, so we're just estimating the dome volume. And so we think we got 9.5 to 10 to 1. The nice thing about it is, if it's been 0 decked, is that it's going to have, with 43 thou head gasket, 43 thou quench, which is a really nice number. So not going to take too much changing when it goes back together. We are going to change the cam, take it completely apart. Will we use these pistons? Don't know yet. We'll see what they look like when we get it apart. Okay, we're still trying to get Blakelee's 340 Dodge engine apart, and we got the lifters out. Everything looks like in great shape. We already mentioned what cam it is. Too bad we can't use it. It's almost tempting because the cam looks to be in great shape, actually. The lifter bottoms look perfect. So we've calculated compression ratio. We already mentioned that. We're somewhere between 9.5 and 10. We can have a more precise calculation when we get everything all cleaned up and we can measure more accurately, but we're close enough. Got the balancer off. I didn't get a chance to show you that. This cover, this is almost like the front of a Pontiac, by the way. So I mentioned these guys snoop on each other. It looks like they learn from each other too. So this cover is going to have to come off, but the oil pan's got to come off first. So taking apart an old grungy engine is a messy job. So get ready. We're going to flip it over. We have drained the oil, but we're still going to have a mess, as you'll see in a minute. So that's what the cardboard's for. And we even got some water coming out of it. So the oil pan has to come off first. They're all 1/2-inch bolts. So to stay organized, wife saves me these nice little plastic, I don't know, salad or something came in it, and keep everything together so we're not looking for parts when we're going back together, or bolts or anything like that. So that's one side. And let's see what we got. Oh, it's got a windage tray too. Pretty grungy in the bottom. Now, I don't know if that's an OEM part or not, to be honest with you, because I'm not a Dodge person. But it's a pretty cool looking windage tray anyway. I love it. Look, it's got the vents here. Let the oil out, so, and not let it back in, and keep the crankshaft, you know, out of the windage, which is probably worth somewhere around 5 to 10 horsepower. So we got to get this guy apart before we can take the crankshaft out, get the oil pump off, oil pump pickup, and we'll get at that next. Okay. Okay, never lift this one off before. So, oh, it's actually pretty easy. It's actually pretty easy. There. So there's the bottom end. Doesn't look much different than a small block Chev, does it? And there goes your drive shaft and your distributor drive, right? That's what that's all about. Let's just leave this down here for now. Let the oil drain. It's over nice and easy, so let's guess we got to get a couple of main caps off and have a look at them, right? Still exploring Blakelee's 340, so haven't been this far. Back in the day, I put intake manifolds and stuff on them, but I've never built one. But half-inch main cap bolts. Chevrolet are 7/16, 3/8 rod bolts. Some Chevrolets are only 11/32. Actually, they're not even 3/8. Some are 3/8 rod bolts for stock, and it looks like a forged, also a forged crankshaft. So we're going to take some bearing caps off and see what they look like. So let's see what we got. Crankshaft looks great. So one of the tests is you run your fingernail across it, and if your fingernail is dragging on it, then you probably got to do something. But it looks pretty nice, and the wear on the bearing looks pretty good too. There's always some witness marks, but it's nice and smooth. But we'll also check the clearances, obviously, right? We're not going to just go by that. The next question is, has this crankshaft been turned? So we got to get this bearing out. So we got to take it over to the vise probably. Starting to get a little cluttered in here. We have to do a cleanup here pretty soon. This happens to be the thrust bearing. So a Chevrolet thrust bearing is at the back, and most other engines, the thrust bearing, because you have a surface here as well, right? And there's a surface in the block that it rubs against. to manage thrust. So we got lucky. We got the thrust bearing on the first try, and let's get this guy out. Sometimes they just fall out, sometimes they don't. There we go. So the back side of the bearing should tell you it's 010. That means this crankshaft's been turned 10 thousandths of an inch. That's typically the story. Look up the other numbers as well, but that's the most important number. We know that already. It's been turned 10 thousandths, and based on this one, we probably don't have to turn it anymore, but we have to check the rest of them and see. All right, see what the rods look like. Look at the rod. I know I'm moving around on you too much. The journal looks pretty good. And usually we'll get this bearing cap off, this bearing out, and see what it is. There we go. So first I got to make sure I don't lose the nuts. So Blakelee, see how much your connecting rod journals are also turned 10 thousandths of an inch. Okay. So that's a typical, first cut, and you can turn a crank 10, 20, 30 thousandths. Probably the easiest bearings to buy are usually 10 thou, because that's the most common. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And if you don't have to cut it anymore, we won't, that's for sure. So next we got to get a piston out. So we got to get it near top dead center to start with. Where's my bar? Where's my big socket? There it is. Be careful when taking pistons out. Just go easy, because they can get, you want to get it to top dead center. So this piston, I've already got the cap off it. So it's number 5. They're all numbered. We checked that, by the way. Never take the caps off until you're sure they're numbered. In this case, they're very well numbered. Right in the casting marks, they're numbered. 1, 2, 3, 4 in the mains, and the rods are also numbered. But you can put pistons in another place, and it really probably no time won't hurt you, but you sure don't want to mix up your main bearing caps, because your engine is lying bored with them in place, and it just will not be good if you get them mixed up. So I'll get that piston as close as we can to start with, and try to get that crankshaft away from it. And now we got to see how hard it is to get it out. So there's other ways of doing this, but we got this connecting rod disconnected, the caps off. I got the crankshaft turned, so I'm not going to get tangled up with the crankshaft and scratch it. It's free. So you have to just take your time and be careful. And the piston's going to be hard to go. There's a little bit of a ridge. There's not very much, so I don't think it's going to take too much. And then it's just going to fall out. So you got to catch it, right? Hang on. You got to make sure the piston doesn't, the connecting rod doesn't. How close are we? Oh yeah, we are almost out already. There we go. There's the piston. So let's flip it around and see what the bore looks like. Okay. That's fun. Just bolts, nothing serious. So, just looking at the piston. Finally getting the camshaft, the heart of it out. The crankshaft's still in. We have checked one main bearing, one rod bearing. They look really good. One piston's out. Cylinder wall looks fine. I mean, this needs to be honed and rings replaced, but it looks pretty good. And the nice thing about a Mopar, you can reach in here with your hand, and because in a Chevrolet, this is all filled in. You can't see very much here. Not enough to get your hand in there. And this cam's not going to get used anyway, but you got to kind of keep turning it because the lobes will start getting in the way of the bearings. And there we go. Okay, we got enough now. We got leverage now. And there we are. And first glance, it looks pretty nice. We only measured a couple lobes. They were all right on spec within a couple of thou. So we certainly don't have any wiped out lobes on it. That's for sure. So this cam's probably usable. So, or reusable. So let's see what we're going to do. Okay, welcome back. We're going to sum up on inspection and tear down Blakelee's 340. So every engine has a story, so this one's a pretty unique story. So Blakelee's uncle donated this to her when she was a year old. She's 8 years old now. 9 years old now. Oh, sorry, Blakelee. And so we're going to rebuild this engine. And 1970 Dodge Dart 340. It's the 340, of course, is going into it. And it's a 4-speed 391 gear car. So it's going to be a pretty cool car. Blakelee, you're going to have to learn how to use that clutch. So it's going to be pretty cool. So Mike's had it in storage for quite a few years and finally getting around to do something with it. And fun for me, I have not done a Mopar engine. So if you're watching my channel already and you're a Mopar guy, you're going to love this. Something different. But you know, we've already made the similarity. They're very, very similar to a small block Chev in lots of ways. And then if you get a lot of other things at the front, the timing cover setup, the fuel pump drive, all that stuff looks like a Pontiac. The main caps have a little groove in them to splash into the cylinder walls, just like a Pontiac. So I mentioned before, these guys snooped on each other, so they took some ideas from Pontiac and Chev when they built this one. And it's a nice piece. So we're pretty happy with what we found so far. The cylinder walls, it's a rebuild, so but the cylinder walls have already been bored 30 thou. From what I can see, Mike's probably going to replace these pistons. They're Silverlight pistons. They probably could be reused. The cylinders need to be honed. We'll hand hone it in my shop here. We've done lots of them like that with pretty good success. New rings and bearings. The crankshafts turn 10 thou on the rods and the mains, and the bore is 30 thou. What's going in? Mike already has the camshaft, Comp 268XE cam that's going in. New cam and lifters, of course, and it had a Mopar 280 camshaft in it. I think we 276 lift. I think it was, and 236, 238 duration, close enough, in that range anyway. So pretty aggressive cam. We've already done the calculation, a rough calculation. We'll refine that when we get everything cleaned up. Based on the deck height that we have, the head gasket thickness, and the piston dome volume, we're right on 10-to-1 compression ratio now, and that's just a nice number. That cam. The cylinder heads we have not taken apart. They've obviously not the original valve springs or retainers, so Mike has new springs anyway, but we don't really know. From what we see, the cylinder heads look fine, but we haven't got them apart yet. So lots of cleaning to do, and that's the grungy part of it, but it's got to be done. So we'll get it cleaned up, change the cam bearings, of course, hone the cylinder walls. It's going to get hot tanked and get all the core plugs out of it, get all the frost plugs out of it, get all the oil plugs out of it, so we can do a good job of when it gets hot tanked, and it'll probably get magnafluxed as well to make sure there's no cracks. We have no suspicion that it is, and we'll get this back together for Blakelee, and we're looking at, I don't know the timing right now, this is the 2nd of February, and we have another dyno date on March the 8th, I think, so whether we're going to make that or not, I don't know. But we'll work towards that, and we'll keep Blakelee and everybody else updated on the progress as we go. Thanks for watching Gold Scratch.